back with part 3. We're talking about now trying to use some Jquery to grab stuff from our web page. Anytime we'd like to use Jquery, we need to add the library either in JSBin or using this command. And in fact, that's where, even if I'm using Notepad++, I always go to JSBin. Where's JSBin? Right there. Add the library Jquery and then just copy that. That's how I do it. Copy and then put that in your HTML. And remember, it goes before your code, because otherwise, if your JavaScript code runs first, it gets goofed up on the Jquery lines. So remember to include that. Then we need to recall our Jquery skills. So here we go. Look at all this mess. So first of all, I'll come back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, copy that, put it into our code, and then I'll explain it and come back to the note, as long as that's okay with you. I'm going to put this down here. In fact, I think this is going to replace all this other stuff, so I'm just going to comment all that out. Yeah, that's all commented out except for our Jquery. So remember, the $sign shows that Jquery is going on right away. The brown is the DOM stuff, document object model, ready. And then in the ready, when it's ready, we're running this function. And the function is essentially going to have the same sort of stuff as our earlier, but using Jquery. Notice, remember, the Jquery access to an ID is a hashtag. And I think my button was called my button this time, my button. When we click, it's going to have a var to add, input ID equals, and now this is Jquery action. We wouldn't have to necessarily do it this way. This is pretty fancy, and in fact, I'm going to delete this just so I can go back to basics. So when it's clicked, what are we going to do? We're going to use the same line we did before, which isn't Jquery. That's just grabs the my element, element by ID, my input. That's the text box. And then we're going to console log it. Why not? Just because we're boring, right? Some var dot value. Just for now, just to show you that the Jquery works. And that looks fine. And I'm going to save that. Go and run that. Then I'll get into the fancy stuff that we had. Okay. Hello. Oh yes, that's right. You see what I forgot to do? I forgot to take the on-click thing out of. I don't need this anymore. I don't need the J button or the. I'm using Jquery. I don't need the on-click in my HTML. And so the event listener is actually hooked up in the Jquery. So thus the error. Nice job, Rustall. I'm going to clear that. And then let's see if it works. Yep, there it goes. Printing off a bunch of hellos. Dandy. Okay. So, some Jquery stuff. Remember, the Jquery is in $signs. This is the triggering Jquery event. This is things like hover and double click and key press and all those other things. And this inside part I'll talk about soon, but that's where we had grab the element and then process it, right? What we could do, and now I will actually copy these two lines. This is a little more fancy up the output a little bit in here. This is Jquery. This to add is kind of like I had some var before, but it's to add instead. It doesn't matter. But what it's doing, it's finding the input with the ID name text. Now I don't have a name text. My ID that was my text box was my input, and then it's grabbing the value. And this is very similar to the, but this is jQuery. This is jQuery stuff. I'm going to save that. And notice that what this has done now, it's saying go find an output and make the HTML whatever this was. Well, in my HTML, I don't have an output. I have a button that's called my input. So let's make some output. And I'm going to call this the ID equals output. And then I'm going to write it, output goes here. Save that. Show you that that works, I hope. So right now that's the first thing. Output goes here. And then I have does it. Hit my yep button. And actually it did. It replaced the paragraph elements with what I grabbed. So this stuff is jQuery, and we did some practice, and hopefully that rings a faint bell in your head about when we used Code Academy to do some form processing then. And this could be name, or it could be class, or we could have any sort of we could grab any sort of HTML tag. This would happen to be the input tag. What else do we want to say? The HTML sets values, .val retrieves values. And remember, identifying HTML elements by ID is with a hashtag. And if it was a class, then it would be a dot output. Remember, class, if it was class equals output, this would be a dot instead of a hashtag. Okay. Next and last, array-like elements. So, for instance, on a form, we might want. Let's go back to it. I'm gonna write a little bit, do a little bit of coding here first, and then come back to the note. So, for instance, we might have more than one line for an address, say, and I'm gonna have this as an input. Type equals text. And I'm gonna give this a name, not an ID, but a name equals address. And that's going to be my line 1, and I'm going to use a BR so it gets on the next line. I'm just going to copy this and paste it, so then I have 3 lines in my address. So, and I'm going to show you that the JavaScript worked, or sorry, the HTML worked. Show you that. So there's my lines. Hello, this worked. But remember, I don't have any processing going on for those. And notice there are 3 very similar text boxes. All have the same name. The name is address, right? They all have the same name. And why did I do that? It's so I can process them all at the same time. And I'll show you how you do that. Oops. Let's go back to the note. So what it says here is var lines document.get elements by name, and it won't be get elements by ID. That doesn't work. And in the quotes, remember, is whatever name we gave the input boxes in our HTML, which was address in this case. And I'm just going to copy this and come back to the note after we've had it working. In our code, in our click event listener, and I'm actually going to get rid of all that other stuff. Get this looking nice. Oops. And I'll explain what's going on here. So the first line, let's see, oh, it should be in 1. There we go. So the first line, this line right here, get elements by name, grabs all of the address inputs and puts them into one file, one variable called text lines. It's an array. So there's actually three of them. There's three variables in this text lines. This variable is setting us up for later, and I'll show you this in a moment. But if I wanted to process all of the text lines at once, then I could use a for loop, right? And this doesn't matter whether there was 3 or 300, this same amount of code would work. Var I equals 0, I is less than text lines dot length, I plus plus. This is how we've been processing arrays for 2 years now. And what we're doing is we're just using this sentence variable to add up all the values of the text lines. So here, then at the end, we're using more jQuery to append all the address lines all together. So let me show you that working, and then I'll come back to the code again. I'll come back to the note and explain it a little bit more. So I'm going to run that. Stratford, Ontario, not spelt right, but I don't care. Canada, hello. And then I press yep, and what did I do wrong there? Oh, I didn't save it. I didn't save it. Let's save it. All that typing for nothing. Let's do it again. Stratford, Ontario, Canada, good. All right. And so it's that for loop grabbed all three of those boxes in one loop and processed them all at one time. Now let's go back to the notes so I can try and fill in the blanks here. So in the loop, remember we're used to this loop, and the text lines I, remember that's how we know it's an array, or at least it feels like an array. Each of the input boxes gets put into this one variable text lines, and then I can grab each of the values, and essentially the sentence variable here is a running total of them. Does it all at once and then appends it to the body. That's more jQuery, and then that worked. So that's pretty cool. And again, would this be much more difficult just to give the three address lines different IDs and process them all separately? Well, no, except for what happens if there was 17 lines? Would you want to have 17 different variables? It would be exactly the same amount of code if we handle them all at once like this. And in fact, this idea of arrays is how we're going to process things like checkboxes and radio buttons, but that ain't until tomorrow. So hopefully you got all that code down. It's a long lesson today, but I think the exercises are short. Basically get some code working, and then we're on to bigger and better things tomorrow with radio buttons and checkboxes. That's all I have to say about that.